it just comes in, it harms your kidneys, your liver, just everything that takes your body to process it and go through it. It's just not natural. It's not meant to be in your body. And it makes you strong as and people say they feel like they're on top of the world when they take it. But to me, that's not really worth the health risk anymore.
What's up, guys? Derek, moreplaysmoredates.com. Just spit all over my camera, but it's fine. Today we are reacting to the drug so toxic that Mr. Olympia Chris Bumstead refuses to take it, PEDs. That is keyword city, bro. Like, that is going to do some numbers. Like, that is SEO. The SEO juices are fucking, like, oozing out of that title, bro. So I am optimistic about this one crushing. And it looks like it is already. Kudos to Chris Williamson crushing it with the guest recently. And the production quality is literally nonsensical. It is actually hard to wrap your head around what the fuck this guy is doing as far as production quality. It's like I'm watching literally a documentary / movie every single time at this point. We got an unknown compound on the screen in a multi-dose vial with an interesting syringe to accompany it. It is the classic 6 milliliter syringe that starts at 5 and then drops to 4, 1, 2, 2, 3. We all have one of those at home somewhere. So what is the guesses here? Like, I think it's pretty safe to say we'd be within 90% likelihood of being correct by guessing that this is going to be Tren, but I could be wrong, and I hope to be pleasantly surprised with something different and interesting. But that's not to say that that's a bad answer. It's just relatively predictable, and we'll get into why that is shortly, and my thoughts myself on it. Have my thoughts changed on Tren over the years? The full podcast goes live Monday. Should be a banger. Let's get into this one.
I know that you're quite health conscious about bodybuilding.
Yeah.
By the way, shout out to the video guy, Dean. This is some fucking wizardry going on around here.
Yeah.
But obviously it's a very rough sport, physically, psychologically, hormonally. Do you have any concerns about longevity? You know, you've done an awful lot of extreme things to your body over the last decade. Mm-hmm. How worried are you about that longer term?
I mean, I think if you're a bodybuilder and you don't worry about that, you're either stupid or lying, to be completely honest. So it's something I definitely, obviously with all my own health conditions from the past, is on the forefront of my brain. But I just manage it as best as I can. You know, there's blood work you can get done consistently to keep your markers on. There's a lot of tests. You know, diagnostics now are absolutely insane. And if you want to stay healthy long term, it's getting something, if something's going on with you, catching it early.
Yeah, with him, I definitely commend the mental fortitude to compartmentalize this stuff so effectively, because it's like there's already like some huge amount of stress being the champion, having, you know, expectations to meet as this, like, literally the most popular fitness dude, like, maybe ever. And with him, I don't know if a lot of you guys, most of you probably know, but if you didn't, he has a autoimmune disease that is pretty impactful on his kidney health. That has been a huge obstacle in the past, but seemingly he's got it under control now. But, you know, most people in this industry are just, you know, doing the normal health screening. They're not looking at also handling an autoimmune disease concurrently that is attacking an organ that is notorious for getting destroyed by chronically high blood pressure, which is like one of the main things that bodybuilders end up fucking themselves up over. Which, by the way, super low-hanging fruit to get fixed and not have it fuck you up. Cardiac remodeling, morphology and function getting like completely devastated of your heart, as well as kidney secondarily to that as a result of chronically high blood pressure, is not uncommon in this industry, but it often goes completely overlooked by guys who don't have something as basic as a blood pressure cuff in their home. Like, it costs not like pennies to get a blood pressure cuff relative to the amount of drug the amount you'd be spending on drugs if you're a bodybuilder at the end of the day. The amount of food you buy, the, you know, everything you're doing. If you don't have a cuff in your house, like, literally click off the video right now and go buy one is my suggestion. So anyways, for Chris, it sounds like he's on top of that shit, and kudos to him for that, because that's a big burden to, wrap your head around, knowing that you have an additional layer of risk even, and you're still, handling the mental side of it well and are seemingly persevering.
So I do a lot of diagnostics and blood work and make sure I'm getting healthy. And ever since I was sick in 2018, my blood work's kind of continuously improved. So I know there's no like negative impact I'm putting on myself. Like I've reduced a lot of the stress and negative things I put in my body and increased more of my health. Like the type of food I give in me, it's not just calories. It's actually the quality of the food and the type of food and everything that I need that like I really focus on rather than just straight macros. I've never been a macro guy, and I'm even less now because I actually care about my health. And all these aspects, like everything I know I need with my body, comes from a lot of the diagnostics I've done and vitamins and all this stuff. And I just know that I've made an agreement with myself that when these things start to falter and they start to go down, no matter where I'm at in my career, if I'm peaked, if I'm not peaked, if I'm about to be better, I just need to call it.
Damn, commendable, especially where he stands in the industry right now, because it's like, even though he is doing things that hedge longevity-wise to actually have, a presence that transcends competing and having like the prominent champion, fitness persona that he is, through entrepreneurial endeavors and whatnot, like I imagine there is huge pressure to stay competing and continue to subject yourselves to certain things that are not necessarily the most conducive to longevity. So that's, to be able to take a step away when you have something crop up is definitely, hard. Like, it's not like I could even wrap my head around and fathom that kind of a decision, nor could, many people, but it is, I find, always really commendable and, inspiring in like an odd way when you see really successful pros walk away. Like Dorian Yates downsizing significantly and being cool with it and not letting it fuck up his head. Like that guy was at the pinnacle of the Open Olympia for years and was the go-to guy, like the face of bodybuilding, and gave it up and downsized and is now in a probably much better spot than he would have been otherwise if he kept trying to push harder and harder and maintain his top spot and for as long as he could. There's only so much you can redline the engine in this fitness industry, seemingly. One thing I would say though, as far as, if your markers look good and they're getting better, then it means that you're healthy. Don't go by just blood work. Like that is road that many have gone down that felt like they were being proactive and staying on top of their stuff and then still dropped. And a lot of people were not staying on top of their imaging and actually assessing for soft plaque accumulation or things that otherwise couldn't necessarily be picked up directly on a blood test. Like even if you have a, relatively, average looking ApoB or triglyceride level or what have you, and like a low C-reactive protein, like who's to say that you're not stacking up plaque still? Like you don't really know until all of a sudden you have obstructed blood flow or you have a fill in the blank cardiac issue. It's not something that is always going to be reflected in your biomarkers on a blood draw. So just be cognizant of that. With Chris, I'm sure he's had, ultrasounds to assess, how his kidneys are functioning and whatnot and what's going on there above and beyond just like blood tests. So especially if you're going to subject yourself to this, level of stress, be comprehensive for sure.
I know that it's not worth it to me. There's a life after bodybuilding for sure. Who I am is not a bodybuilder. There's more to me than that. And I'll be happy without it. And there's no point in like that beautiful as this moment in my life is. It's already been a great time. But if I'm going to sacrifice my future life, hopefully with a family and my children of my own, and I'm going to be sick or unable to enjoy it with them, that's the biggest thing I would regret. So I'm staying on top of knowing where I'm at, and if it goes down, I'm just gonna have to call it quits.
Yeah, I've heard you say that in the past there was compounds and things that you would have taken that now you're like, this is it's too dangerous. What are the things that for you are like off the table with regards to this is too much, this is too risky for me?
The biggest one is like,
fuck. I was gonna pause it before he said it just to see if I had anything else that would come to mind, but It was going there anyway. What am I doing? It's Tren. Come on, Trenbolone sandwich. I am almost certain.
Red.
There it is, bro. He's even smiling because he knows how predictable of an answer it is.
Like Tren.
Yeah.
The good old Tren that, like, there's guys who
Good ol'.
base their social media off that now. It's just like a meme of the internet, of the gym club, who just, and I don't even think people realize the impact off that now. It's just like a meme of the internet, of the gym culture. And I don't even think people realize the impact that these jokes and memes have on like people coming up who would just see you constantly joking and talking about saying you need more of it to like be better and feel stronger and all this shit. But that's probably the most toxic thing you can put in your body. And I've done it in the past.
There's a bunch of people commenting right now or just thinking to themselves, it's definitely not the most toxic thing. Like, wouldn't it have been more interesting if he was like, just said some exotic shit like, oh, check drops. I used to go fucking insane off that stuff, but I can't use it anymore. Like, wouldn't that have been just like a wild twist in the story? But no, it was Tren. It was Tren, which, you know, good old Tren. We all know, and love-hate relationship with that shit, bro.
But I don't anymore. I just haven't touched it in like 5 years.
Why?
Just the toxicity it causes in your body. Like it just comes in, it harms your kidneys, your liver, just everything that takes your body to process it and go through it. It's just not natural. It's not meant to be in your body. And it makes you strong as fuck. And people say they feel like they're on top of the world when they take it. But to me, that's not really worth the health risk anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like when you think back to, well, I don't know, I guess it depends how old you are and how long you've been using stuff or if you even use stuff. But, you know, back in the day, you would, you know, you'd design a cycle and you'd ask for advice from people in the know, and you would be told things like, oh yeah, use 400 Tren. That's like a reasonable amount, even though you've never like even really used it before. Like, these are the things we were told as reasonable back in the day, whereas now it'd be like, holy shit, here's 7 reasons plus 10 more of why this is not like a good choice right now in an off season when there are other compounds you could use that accomplish the exact same outcome with much less burden on your organs, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not to say Tren doesn't have a obvious place in a pre-contest setting, and there's a reason why a lot of people use it, but that's also not to say that you couldn't get similar outcomes without it too. But it's interesting because it's like back in the day we just had not much information, and I guess it's good that despite the fact that Chris doesn't really like talking specifics about this stuff, that there are ways in which he can impart this information in a more, I don't know, subtle fashion that still indicates what his feelings are about risk and if he could go back in time, what he would do differently, kind of thing. Because, you know, even when he was coming up, like I remember when I used to follow the Canadian nationals and whatnot closely and see, you know, who's coming up the ranks and, you know, who's most likely to take the overall this year, who's the front runner, etc. And it was way harder to get a pro card way back then when Chris was coming up too. You know, we didn't really know a lot of this shit. Like, there was not really high level education out there. YouTube was not really a very popular thing. Back then you would just watch like bum fights and shit on the internet, and that was basically it. So, and there was like little underground forums with people who just heard through the grapevine from other bodybuilders anecdotally what's the best thing, but no one was really looking at literature. No one was considering like, you know, human approved compounds and what the actual, you know, dosage schematics were for clinical applications. We didn't have like widespread anecdotes with, you know, more feedback to consolidate informed, educated opinions on compounds and if they're worth using or not. We were just kind of going by what our top 10 gym bros would say and running with it. So, you know, it's interesting to see this transition as people kind of come into the know more and more education becomes widespread.
And another reason why I love Classic Physique is because I hit a weight cap, and I was close to my weight cap like 3 years ago. Not at it, but I could have taken more shit and really tapped out and been at the point where I couldn't put on any more weight, or I could actually take less shit and force myself to work harder, be more consistent with my diet and my training and my recovery, and then still get that result. But it would just be a little bit more effort. You know, there's a peak open bodybuilder with no weight cap probably needs to do everything to be the best. But if I can just still put in the discipline and the work and then take out some of the less shit that's hard on my body, then I'm on the same point that I would be. It's just a little bit more effort.
It says it all that you, as somebody who is competing at the highest standard of bodybuilding on the planet, is still finding compounds where you're like, that's off the table.
Yeah.
That's too much.
Sure.
Yeah, with Tren, one thing I should say is I had a similar opinion where I was like, oh, it's so toxic, never touch it, etc. But it's like, a lot of people think it's this cattle drug that got shot into them to beef them up, which is not, it's not untrue. That's, the pioneering of Finaplex H, conversion kits that people would use, decades ago. But this was a human approved compound at one point by Negma Pharmaceuticals. And that's where these OG parabolin amps came from, is the OG Trenbolone hexahydrobenzyl carbonate. And it came in 76 milligram ampules that were prescribed to women, shockingly enough, and it was seen as efficacious. There's a reason it got approved. Granted, it got discontinued, but then again, so did like every other steroid under the sun too. And that is when the halting of the pipeline of their development essentially happened, is, shut down things like Tren from becoming more refined, shut down things like Primobolan from getting more refined, whichever company was spearheading the, development of new novel compounds, whether it was DHT derivative, 19-Nors, etc. They only got as far as this, and it's actually kind of disappointing to think about how refined and far we could have come if we've been actually, there's no other drug class or drug in general whereby you're dealing with like shitty primitive drugs that were designed in like literally the 60s still. Like, people are still using drugs that were approved for human use in the 60s as their primary anabolics of choice now, which is fucking mind-boggling. Like, if you look at any class of medications, we're using drugs that are refined, like even to date, like continuously tweaked and modified to make more side effect free and targeted and efficacious and tissue selective, depending on what it's doing, or receptor selective and not, interacting with other satellite, receptor interactions through its, affinity for fill in the blank. Like, there are things that are getting more and more refined all the time from a, cardiac health standpoint, a lipid management perspective standpoint. But from a anabolics perspective, muscle wasting, like, that is such a ancient fucking class of compounds at this point that it's a shame, because I feel like at this point by now we could have had some really, really, really dialed in stuff that was, a fraction of the side effect burden. But alas, we had that shit sidelined, decades ago because of stupid, Olympic scandals and whatnot. Which is just stupid. But anyways, Chris, finding ways to accomplish the same outcome with different drugs, that's good. There's definitely ways to do it. And for him, I feel like he's just in the perfect spot where just like fortuitous timing, where this, new division came out where he has like a weight cap where it's like, even if he wanted to get bigger, there's not like a huge incentive to really do it, because his weight cap doesn't afford him that much space to really, he doesn't have a lot to gain by pushing at this point, because it just doesn't make sense given the stipulations of the category. But it makes you wonder, like, imagine if classic physique didn't exist, would he even be on stage necessarily? Like, would he have been an open pro trying to gun for the open Olympia? I would imagine not, but it's just wild how sometimes the timing of stuff, like, not only do you need to be a genetic freak and phenom with exceptional work ethic and have all of these things line up perfectly for you, but then also even the, like, creation of a new category, like, right as you're coming into your own. It's just wild how many things have lined up for him, and it's, seemingly couldn't have happened to a more genuine and nice dude. So it's, you can see why the community gets behind him so much, and it's really cool to see. It makes you wonder, how some of the guys from the 90s and the 2000s and whatnot would do if they were, born 20 years later. Like, if you had a Lavroni born in, like, I don't know when he was born, but let's just say he was like early 30s now instead of however old he is now, and he was, peaking on social media and competing at the Olympia and whatnot. It's just, it's wild how much timing plays into everything as well in this industry. You only have so much you can redline the system as an athlete, in any endeavor, really, unfortunately. But anyways, the other compounds, I felt like this is something worth touching on. This is all of the different ways by which anabolics can impact muscle building and performance. And it's not just through androgen receptor activation, which is what a lot of people seem to think. They think it just binds to the AR and does certain things from a gene expression standpoint, and it does for sure. But there are other satellite interactions and genomic and non-genomic interactions that can contribute and have like a cumulative stacking effect whereby you can seemingly get similar overall outcomes with what is otherwise a proportionally less side effect burdensome drug stack, which is great that he's dialed in things that don't require him to subject himself to Trenbolone sandwiches. But uniquely from a Tren standpoint, like what are the things that it does that maybe other compounds don't do as well? Worth pointing out, AR activation, obviously an extremely potent AR agonist, which most of you guys are probably familiar with, but also its anti-catabolic activity through antagonism of glucocorticoid receptors. It is not the only compound that does this by any means, but it seems to have a very, very unique and potent anti-catabolic effect where it excels exceptionally well even in a recomp scenario in a calorie deficit. And it also has pretty significant psychoactive effects on the brain, which some of the more refined compounds probably like in a superior fashion from a actual muscle building standpoint, from a pure tissue accretion standpoint are superior, but you don't necessarily get some like the side effect psychoactive effects that you get from Tren that may be, you know, performance enhancing on top of everything else, which can be good or not good depending on what your goals are. Because, you know, do you necessarily need that? Do you need to be worrying about your girlfriend fucking cheating on you so you can get a bit more aggro on the weights too? You know, do you need to be sweating your dick off while you're sleeping? Which, by the way, like my opinion on the compound has changed a little bit. I'm not necessarily saying it's the most toxic thing you could take, that's for sure. I don't think I ever would have, but it is, I feel like something that is typically overdosed on. People are using too much of it to get the effect they're trying to get out of it. And in addition to that, I think a lot of people don't know how to manage the side effect burden of progestogenic drugs because they are more complicated. With DHT derivatives that are very, very clean and refined and have well-tolerated outcomes with clinical literature to support their efficacy and safety profiles, you kind of know what you're doing. They're going to, you know, compete for aromatase and they're going to be pretty predictable in their outcomes. Whereas with progestogenic drugs where you have like literally like menopause induced type night sweats from a drug, even though you're a guy in your 20s, it's like how to manage that side effect burden where you don't just fuck yourself up more by taking things like, you know, dopamine receptor agonists like Caber and pramipexole and whatnot. It is not a well enough understood drug class, the 19-nor category, for people to be really fucking around with it with like blindly, in my opinion. So I don't even necessarily think it's as much of a, you know, the dose is the poison is one thing, but in addition to that, I think just the category itself is not very well understood, and that definitely adds a layer of complexity that makes it more difficult to manage, and it leads to side effects that can be unmanageable for many. And I have seen, you know, people have like outlier stress on their organ systems through Tren exposure, where you have people with deteriorating kidney function and even liver toxicity seemingly, and then obviously the cardiac stuff. So it is a compound that needs to be respected, and it should not be just like, you know, haphazardly jumped on because you think that everyone who's successful in social media or in the fitness industry is on it, because it's certainly not the case. And Chris is a testament to that.
You can always find things to take out and things to add in and ways to get better, things that are like unnecessary, and just kind of fine tuning. And, you know, like a lot of any type of success is getting the most out of the least and what other effort. The amount of work you put in a day, the amount of shit you put in your body, the amount of training even you do, it's just being as efficient as possible so that you're getting maximum result from minimum effort, essentially.
Yeah, we've spoken before, and I think that it's a smart approach that you have of not talking about the things that you use and dosages, because it's just going to result in people doing, if I take X, then equals Chris Bumstead.
Then I'll look like Chris Bumstead.
Precisely.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think that you've mentioned before, people would be very surprised at how low those numbers are.
I think most people in the sport can look at me and be like, okay, he hasn't made much changes in 6 years. Like, and they see me training and they see how consistent I am, so they would understand. But I think a lot of maybe aspiring kids who who just want to like maybe look like me or look like a pro bodybuilder, they'd be like, no, I gotta take this, but he's lying. Like I need more, like to be like that. Why don't I look like that? And they don't see A, my amazing genetics, shout out to my parents for that, and then B, the 10 years of work I put in that has been consistent.
Yeah, you know, as much as I know he doesn't like talking about the specifics, I think that it's good that he's open to at least the subject matter, because some bodybuilders get really tight-assed about this shit. They literally get upset almost, and almost like you're downplaying their hard work when, like, no one's this stupid at this point to not think drugs are important in the outcomes of the sport. So I don't think anybody should be insulted about the subject matter being discussed in an open forum. And Chris isn't, which is great. And I think he plays a fine line pretty well of not saying exactly what he does, but at the same time, like, highlighting what is involved to a, you know, some degree. Because it's important that people understand, I feel like, personally, that for him, his outcomes are not going to be equal to yours in that there's not some secret that he's doing that you don't know about. Because a lot of times when pros don't talk, the outcome is the assumption that there's some exotic secret that is being withheld among the top coaches that you're just unaware of. And that is the prevalent, you know, underground like understanding is that everyone thought was the case, you know, years ago, that the pros have essentially either hit some threshold dosage amount that mutated them, that, you know, it's not like from 0 to a gram, you can make gains, but, you know, at a certain dosage threshold that's in the grams territory, all of a sudden things just exponentially increase into the stratosphere. Like, that was a pretty prevalent theory. And then there's also, you know, the access to certain specialty drugs, when in reality, again, similar to what I said about how drugs really haven't developed a lot in the last like fucking 50 years in these drug classes, a lot of people are dealing with most of the same shit. Now, again, having pharmaceutical grade access, having high quality stuff that is actually potency assessed, there is a huge difference in quality between what a lot of guys are using at the end of the day. But as far as like exotic specialty compounds, like, you can be sure as shit that Chris Bumstead is not getting like a Chinese scientist to refine him some new designer drug that is 10 times more effective than the other anabolics people are using that he's competing against. Like, it is just high quality stuff that he would have access to, and that is the only delta between him and his competitors at most, and if even. Like, realistically, anybody who'd be competing at the Olympia has good sources, almost certainly. So I think it's very key to highlight that at the end of the day, the consistency in eating, the genetic response to drugs, to the training, progressively overloading, being meticulous about tracking stuff. You know, not everyone is going to have to pull out all the stops necessarily, but I mean, and the more genetically gifted, the more you can just kind of like somewhat, you know, fumble your way to the top still a little bit to some extent. But either way, there's no getting around the fact that you have to train to a certain intensity level, sleep enough, eat enough food, and take certain drugs. And the sooner people realize that the secret is not just quadrupling your dosages, I feel like the better, because a lot of people do burn themselves out just to win like a regional show, taking grams and grams of shit, when the reality was you should know by the time you get to like, you know, a gram if you're made out for this or not, in my opinion at least. And if you're not, you know, is it really worth pushing unless you're just highly passionate about it and just love the process that much? And by all means, if that's that, then all the power to you. Just understand that the differentiating factor of Chris Bumstead is not going to be that he takes twice as much, you know, a fill-in-the-blank drug as the next guy. Certainly not the case. Like, we could all take the exact same cycle as him and not get the same results. And even when he was coming up, like, you can be sure as shit he's run his, you know, handful of, you know, really abusive cycles probably in the past, as per, I imagine, his own standards. And even if we ran those, like, you're not going to get the same results, unfortunately. You know, muscle belly, structure, it all plays a big role, and genetic response to the drugs is highly variable, and also how well you can tolerate the drugs. That's like a whole nother layer of genetics that often goes overlooked too, is can you even handle the shit without fucking yourself up? And, you know, it is what it is. And for him, it's cool that he's transparent when asked, doesn't get butthurt. And we definitely appreciate that as an audience for, you know, becoming more in the know about like what really goes on in the sport, and you can make a more informed decision at that point if that's something you want to pursue or not. And it's also just fucking interesting, to be honest. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are there any what is the most toxic drug you've used that you would never use again, and what was your experience with it? Drop it in the comments below. I'm sure we can find some interesting ones, get some you know, halo mentions, some check drop mentions, some, you know, methyl Tren mentions, I'm sure. What else? You know, DNP is up there for sure. You know, let me know what you guys think. And I'm looking forward to the podcast on Monday. I think the full episode goes live Monday, according to Chris Williamson. So you check that out when it goes up. And like, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys soon.